Hi everyone, I'm John, your host for today on Route to Scale, a short podcast featuring the founders and operators building the future of e-commerce, fulfillment, mobility, and modern delivery. In this segment, we're going to be focusing in on Africa, and today I'm very honored to have Olabanjo Alimi, CEO and founder of Qoray Mobility and Energies. Qoray Mobility and Energies is a leading Nigerian clean energy and sustainable mobility company established to advance renewable energy adoption and electrical mobility solutions across Africa. They're focused with a mission to provide accessible electrical vehicles, charging infrastructure, and clean energy technologies to governments, corporates, SMEs, and individuals. I'm so grateful to have you on this call, Olabanjo. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, John. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. So we're just going to start off, with something remarkable, which is essentially your story, right? We see that you have an impressive resume, spanning 2 decades across energy, retail, operations, and finance. Tell us, what is your story and what led you to start Corey, Mobility and Energies?
Well, once again, thanks, John. It's good to be here. I think I always say that having been in the downstream of oil and gas space, selling diesel and petrol and lubricants, myself and perhaps some of the people that I worked with have done our fair share of turning the planet into what it is today. And so it felt at some point in time like the transition had to be made first for me, for my career, into what I like to call the natural next step of energy evolution. I thought it was time to maybe pay some reparation to the planet and join the green movement to play my part in positively transiting how energy is used, interacted with, bought and sold, and so on in our country and in our continent. And like you said, I did a bit of time with the oil and gas industry, and then I went to the financial services sector, where I had my first interaction with the scale of the problem that existed in, or that still exists, and the opportunity that exists in the energy space, energy and mobility space, as far as Nigeria is concerned. And that's where Koray's story started, right? And everybody that encounters Qoray would most likely do so by encountering our assets, the electric vehicles, the solar solutions, and so on and so on. But what we build is a little more quiet. It's very intangible. Our most proud work is the work that we do in building the IoT layer that sits within the assets themselves, such that these assets meter themselves,
Hmm.
they report themselves, as well as declare the sort of or provide sort of visibility that financiers like to see. The sort of visibility that allows a guy who lives in suburban Nigeria to all of a sudden be visible, be trusted, and be financed, right? Typically, these financiers will not see or touch these people because they don't have a credit history. And Nigeria's informal sector is massive. It's huge. It employs more than 90% of people who are gainfully employed in the country. Over 40 million SMEs are registered in Nigeria. I mean, they contribute close to 60% of the GDP. So it gives you a sense of the size of the informal sector. And for a clean asset technology business like ours, we are focused in the area of most impact. And for us to do so, we've got to find a way to make these people visible and trusted by the financial system, because we believe that's where the real change happens. So yes, assets, solar panels, inverters and batteries, electric vehicles, charge stations, those are great, and that's how people encounter us typically. But our proudest work sits, somewhere much more quiet, building trust between the operators on the field and the financiers at HQ.
Wow, wow. Awesome, awesome. One thing that I really loved about Corey was when I was researching the intentionality behind creating local focused solutions for Nigeria and your people, like you mentioned, compared to, I guess, some other foreign made solutions or whatnot, right? one thing I found particularly, unique was how Qoray actually operates through several different kinds of EV vehicle types that you guys work with, right? From two-wheelers to four-wheelers or whatnot. Can you share a little bit about what does building an EV company for African roads or Nigeria specifically actually require, right? Beyond, I guess, or it's different from other sorts of EVs in other parts of the world.
Thank you. I mean, from the point of view of the difference between us and the rest of the, say, the global north, for example, I
Right.
think one thing you find readily in places like Singapore, in the Americas, or Europe is the financial system knows you, sees you, has your
Mm,
record to support your journey towards asset ownership and financial prosperity. That is a journey that is still very early in our climb. And so, yes, again, I could tell you all about our three-wheelers, our four-wheelers. I can tell you about our charging stations in Lagos. I can tell you about our swap stations across the country. And those are things that we're really proud of. But those are just
mm,
they're the outcome. What again for us that makes the most sense is really how we're able to get the financial system to trust the average Nigerian who otherwise will not be touched by the financial system. And so building a business that has the capability to scale in our country requires that first off, you organize at the grassroots level, right? You bring people into the conversation, aggregate them in a manner that is that makes it less cumbersome. So, for example, you could deal with 1,000 potential operators who have no credit history, or you could deal with one guy who is a local enforcer in the locale who knows these people and can vouch for them. So through the aggregator system, we're able to find people who are interested in asset ownership but cannot afford it by virtue of their socioeconomic conditions or situations. And once we organize, it is then our job to ensure that, again, the technology is able to put the assets in their hands off the back of very well done KYC, okay, and then get the banks into the conversation so that the banks finance them. So I mean, over the past 3 years or so, our country has evolved, or sorry, conversations about clean tech has evolved from the sustainability buzzword to something that actually means naira and kobo in the pockets of the average Nigerian, meaning that all of a sudden the cost of running an EV
mm,
is more is a lot more efficient than running a petrol or diesel engine. And so the conversation becomes a lot simpler when it's about putting money back in the pockets of people. So bringing them on board the conversation is a lot easier because, again, you can demonstrate how these assets, these technology makes their lives better. So building an EV company in Africa, I mean, we can talk about the four-wheelers that we have, for example, where we provide vehicles for ride hailing for both commercial and retail users. But for us, again, the proudest work is how do we deploy these assets to the most vulnerable part of society, people who genuinely want to own these assets but cannot by virtue of where they are in the conversation. So you cannot talk about deploying EVs in Africa without talking about the informal sector. How does it ensure that the energy transition, the energy transition does not leave them worse off? And what that means is, shall we stand by and watch the corporations bring in all of these assets and profit like they always do? Or shall we evolve a system that allows our people to own these assets off the back of using them and building trust and performing and so on? And so our job is to ensure that this happens. Putting the assets on the ground itself is a huge ask, but I think the bigger conversation is how do we build a trust that is consistent between all the parties that work together? And so you cannot talk about building an EV business in Africa without talking about solving for that layer of trust between the user and the financiers and the OEMs and so on. And that's where Qoray sits.
mm. Wonderful. I just have to double click on that just because you emphasize so much on the inclusive nature of your business and bringing other, other folks, right? When I was doing some research, one of the coolest and most amazing things that I saw was how you were able to place 120 electrical tricycles with women in Kano State, right? What did that experience teach you about building such a community and supporting them with an income around the vehicle, right? Such as the training, financing, maintenance, rather than simply just selling or delivering the asset, so to say, compared to like some other providers.
Thanks, John. It's a very interesting question. I mean, that's exactly how we came into the market.
Right.
Again, we had to, the 120 tricycles we deployed at the time was the single largest deployment of electric vehicles anywhere in Nigeria at the time.
Absolutely.
And there was no other, there was no prouder way to do it for us than to deploy to an all women society in Kano State, as you have mentioned. And I mean, we didn't do this by ourselves. We had the Alternative Bank, which is the institution that trusted us from the very start and invested in the assets so such that the women could own it. But like I said, I mean, our job is consistently trying to provide trust between all stakeholders within that ecosystem. So the technology sees, the technology records, the technology proves that the assets are financeable and can return the desired financial outcomes to all the parties involved. But what it taught us, it went a great distance to prove our mission statement, which is to expand energy access and economic participation through community and partnership,
Mm.
right? Africa is a very communal place. And once people trust you within a community, right, it's easy for, or it's a lot easier for them to come on board, whatever it is you're offering. And, you know, when we got to Kano, the women were very, very, very open-minded. A lot of them had not interacted with electric vehicles up till that moment, right? And they were also very brave, still are very brave. And I say this because it's not very common to find a woman at the wheel in the commercial fleet sector, right? And it's also a very a very interesting cultural dynamics because in northern Nigeria, you have the Islamic religion there, which means that women are required to have a level of just distance with their male counterpart, especially in public. And so when we provided the solution, working with the Alternative Bank and the rest of the other partners we worked with, it was very well received because it provided an avenue for the woman to be at the wheel, for women to also be the passengers. So all of a sudden you have something that was purpose built, that was a culture fit, that was very well embraced. And we learned that our mission statement had a bit of validity because we built it in addition or in collaboration with the community, with the partners we went to market with. And we had an all-women ecosystem, meaning that the women rode the tricycles, the women ran or run the swap station. In fact, we train women also, not just in the assembling of those tricycles, but also in repairs and maintenance. So for us, there was no better place for us to have started. And we're very proud to see that the assets are still on the road as we speak. It just goes ahead. It just goes to prove the validity of the business model, the timeliness of the intervention, and so on and so on.
Mm. Wonderful, wonderful. Wow, that's so awesome. Now, let's start, as we all know, when we start to get into the mobility or such logistical businesses, things get complex, right? As much as we have a grand view, things get complex. Let's chat a little bit about that, right? I read, in doing research that, Qoray, your company is amazingly ambitious, doing so many amazing things. There's some plans to allocate capital across from vehicles, assembly, to charging, to battery swapping, renewable power, maintenance, and obviously the finance part, right? Which part of the system would you feel you're most focused on, right? And how do you decide, where your next so-called, where your next priorities are, given so many things you're working on,
John, like I said earlier,
Hmm.
honestly, it's great deploying all the assets, all the physical assets,
Right.
and that's how people meet Qoray. Your
Mm.
first interaction could be in a Cab Zero four-wheeler that we deployed to move people from point A to B, whether you're a corporate or you're in the retail segment, or it could be that you own an EV and you drive to a Qoray charging station in Lagos to top up, right? Or you ride a three-wheeler, you go to the swap stations and so on and so on, or you interact with our solar solution. Most of the interaction we see initially is really with the hardware, but I think that there's nothing as profound as building the layer that allows everybody to come to the table. And again, that is our IoT and our telemetry technology that first allows the assets to work together, speak to each other, that allows for payments to be collected from the rider, right? That allows the swap cabinet to dispense a battery because it has identified the rider at the station needing a fresh battery, or that allows for every single person within the ecosystem to be paid when they should be, meaning that the financial institutions don't have to worry about chasing the operator on the field. They automatically get their settlement, right? The local unions who are enablers in this conversation get their own settlement, right? Qoray gets its own fee, and so on and so on. That layer is the single most important as far as all of these conversations are concerned, because again, it sits right in the middle, connects all of the assets, and builds trust within all of the stakeholders to ensure that we do this at scale. So, I mean, there's really no other way to say it than without the telemetry and the IoT backbone sat beneath all of this will be a it's going to be difficult to impossible, frankly, to execute.
Wonderful. Since you're starting talking about, the critical nature of the telematics and your IoT and your awesome technology, right? Let's double click on that a little bit, right? As your fleet and your assets continue to grow in both its volume as well as complexity, right? How are you specifically, working on using GPS, telematics, route histories, and battery data, for example, to decide where, maybe where charging stations should be or how vehicles should operate, you know?
So, I mean, we consistently listen to the data.
Mm.
When we started, it had to be very manual. We had to work with what existed on ground. So, working with the local unions, studying the routes, looking at the fueling behavior, speaking to the riders, speaking to everybody within the ecosystem was how we started. So, it was a bit of guesswork. In addition to some on-the-ground survey and questionnaires being dispatched, responses being collated and analyzed and so on. Was how we started, right? But as you go along and you collect more and more data, the data validates your business model or your operating model, or it tells you to probably look elsewhere. And the data doesn't necessarily tell us where. Of course, it tells us which route is more dense, where we have the greater footfall. It does all of that, but we still we don't rely solely on the data, on the telemetry. Certainly, that's very helpful, but it's a mixture of the telemetry and on the ground intelligence from the people who have done this for decades. Just continually, speaking to these people, understanding their points of view, seeking their advice on where the greatest needs exist, and so on. Now, what the telemetry does for us is it helps us to identify where these assets are per time, helps us to identify the level of performance they have
Mm.
against the SLAs we have defined, right? Such that these assets, working with the telemetry technology, working with other technologies we've plugged in, is able to help us, track the assets, collect on the assets, allowing the assets enforce on themselves. And what that means is you could release a three-wheeler to a regular guy somewhere, in I don't know, 1,000 kilometers away from Lagos, right? The asset tells us where it is per time. It tells us how many kilometers it's ridden or driven per day, right? And you can go to the most granular level to find these things out. It tells us how many battery swaps have been done per day, giving us the average energy consumption per kilowatt hour for the trip that has been undertaken by this operator, as well as the entire system, right? It also allows us to collect, like I said, and this is how it works. You wake up in the morning as an operator, and your wallet has a certain amount that has been debited to it because you do owe for the assets. Imagine you owe $10 per day, right? You wake up in the morning and you have a -10 on your wallet, which means the banks do not need to chase you. You've got to fund that wallet first off, and then second, fund the wallet. You fund the wallet first for the financial institution to collect on their asset repayment. You then fund the wallet for your battery swap, so singular wallet, dual use. So when you swap a battery, we have the confidence that the financier who has put their capital behind that machine have collected on their daily repayment. That way, you cannot use the assets whilst you're in default. And the operators understand this and sign up to it, right? Because of the informal nature, you don't want to wait until the end of the week or the end of the month to collect on the asset, because what you then do is you compound the risk of repayment. So as these people earn on a daily, the monies are collected on behalf of the financiers on a daily basis. So first off, you pay for the assets. Second, you pay for the swap. And of course, because we don't have visibility into the collection between the operator and the passengers, it's difficult to have to collect from that level. So we collect at the swap station, keeping everybody honest in that as far as that value chain is concerned, so that again everybody gets value. Financier gets the value, Qoray gets value, and the user themselves also get value on a day-to-day. This is exactly how our technology works and continues to provide the trust that's required within the ecosystem for these to function on a scalable level.
Wow. So if I were to understand, one of the unique parts of your business model a little bit more is, can I just understand that so Qoray primarily partners with financiers that then finances individuals and other corporates to actually lease these vehicles on a kind of like a rent to own model that's repaid on a daily basis. Is that correct? Through Qoray's infrastructure.
That's correct. But before we got into the swing where the financial institutions trusted to put their monies in, we had to carry a bit of asset on our balance sheet, and had to prove the model end to end. And that's why you find that Qoray does a bit of everything at this time. Perhaps as we go along on our journey, we'll start to specialize and withdraw from other areas. But when we started, there was a void in the industry. Wow. And for us to prove to everybody that this would work, we had to invest in the machines themselves. We had to invest in the swap infrastructure, the charging stations, the 3-wheelers, the 4-wheelers, to prove that this was indeed a solution that was practicable, that could deliver value to everybody within the value chain.
Right. So can I just check, does that mean that your swap stations, let's just say, is actually not owned by Qoray? They're owned by some institutions that's loaning from another financial institution, but Qoray is just providing that service to deploy that infrastructure. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct to an extent. Like I said, when we started, we had to deploy our charging stations, for example, are mostly the charging infrastructure belong to us, whilst we partner with location owners like hotels and so on. Right. They provide us with the location, security, power, whilst we provide assets, the expertise, we maintain, we operate, and then everybody gets value in that ecosystem. So it's a bit of both. There are quite a number of swap stations owned by financiers who have trusted us to procure the assets, install the assets, operate the assets, and pay them back in a sustainable manner. There are also assets that are owned by us, especially the legacy ones that we had to use to prove the model, which we still run today.
Right. What's the mix between, let's just say charging infrastructures or battery swap stations that you currently still own and operate versus ones that are, I guess, owned by another institution?
It's around 50-50 right now. Okay. We are hoping during the next 6 to 12 months that ratio would tilt greatly in favor of third-party owned, financier-owned
Right.
infrastructure, because again we've succeeded in building the trust to a certain level, and
Right.
we're having more conversations with people who have now trusted that the system can scale beyond what it is today.
Right. Right. Wonderful. Wonderful. And I love to just see that flywheel effect kind of turning, right, and scaling. Awesome. Um, so, one of the key things that, we've had experience in, especially working in Singapore, is actually discovering optimal charging and battery swap stations can also be challenging
Mhm.
at times. It's almost a bit of an urban planning slash location planning problem, right? I'm just curious, when choosing a site in an area such as, in an area that's growing so robustly, but also chaotically at times, such as Lagos, Nigeria, right? Um, uh, what matters most in the selection of your sites, right? For these obviously infrastructure at times, right? Is it like more of traffic flow, power availability, security? What's the things you look for most when you're thinking about planning the locations of your assets to be deployed, or with the financier, so to say?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to find a suitable partner. We
Mm,
value um, how we localize the operations of the assets, because yeah, I might be a Nigerian domiciled in Lagos. Doesn't mean that if I go to a place like Kano, for example, or Kwara State, that I understand the local nuance. So the first thing is, do we have a partner who understands transportation on a very local level, right? And sometimes they could be union members who've been in the transport sector all their lives. Other times it could be people who own their own assets, but perhaps petrol-based assets in those localities. It could be people who have interacted with this ecosystem for such a long time, worked in it, and so on. But the first thing is, do we have the right partner to lead that expansion, that extra footprint we're trying to plant? And once that's sorted, the next thing we look out for, like you said, is how dense is the route? How potentially um, viable is that route? Do we have, for example, more two-wheelers on that route? Do we have more three-wheelers, and so on and so on? The third is, how many potential charging nodes can we find, or swap nodes can we find in that areas? And there's certain routes that you find that real estate is at a huge premium, right?
mm,
Especially in a place like Lagos, space is not really your friend, right? It's a very densely populated and developed city. So you've got
exactly.
to mind, yeah, where you potentially could site a swap station. And this is where the legacy infrastructure comes to play, right? The filling stations or the service stations of old or the current, so what we do is it possible? Do they have the space? Do they have the orientation in terms of how these stations have been built? Is it somewhere that takes the riders or the operators away from the route, or they could, or this is smack on the routes that we're trying to assess, right? So we also look at partnering with legacy institutions who potentially could come on board and support us with the space, as well as with the roof real estate for us to mount solar panels to charge the batteries, right? So we look for the partners, we look for the routes, we look for the real estate that allows us to put this in place, and certainly we look out for a favorable local regulation or local regulatory ecosystem. Do we have, because in certain states, for example, you couldn't ride two-wheelers on certain streets or certain routes. You couldn't go three-wheelers on certain streets as well. Whereas there are other states in the country where you have more roads available to three-wheelers and so on and so on. So all of these, the local regulation or the local temperature of the regulators, the partners that we find, the location characteristics, whether or not we have the real estate, all of these are valid considerations that we make before we site a swap station.
Wow. Awesome. Awesome. I'm just, time flies when you're having fun. I just have a couple of questions left. Just,
Sure.
so much awesome insights, right? So, Qoray has already just gone from strength to strength, over just these still early stages, I would say, of, you working to build out lots of these, right? So, where is Qoray at right now, in terms of maybe how many vehicles you have deployed or charging stations, right? On a number basis. And then where do you look to go within 1 year, right? What's the next stage of growth look like for Qoray, essentially?
Okay, could you repeat the first question?
Oh, okay. So my question is essentially, what's the next stage of growth like for Qoray? So for example, like where are you at right now in terms of maybe charging stations infrastructure, and where do you look to be within the next 6 to 12 months?
Right. So right now, I think we're at a stage where we have proven that the model works.
Mm,
Still very early days, but we started to build trust. So people trust us more now, right? Whether it's the three-wheeler conversation or the four-wheeler conversation. Now, as far as charging is concerned, for example, in a city like Lagos, we have more and more commercial fleet owners coming to us and striking commercial agreements to
mm,
charge their fleet with us. Not just because we have the widest spread of charging stations in Nigeria, but also because we've demonstrated uptime. So they trust that whatever it is they go to our charging stations, they're able to charge, right? We're also in a place now where, again, our model, and there's two essential models, right? And the first is you could decide to build your power infrastructure from scratch, which is very capital intensive, puts a lot of pressure on your balance sheet. And being a startup, we are more interested in scale than we are in margin protection. It's not like margin protection is not important, but we want to move very quickly, build the trust, allow more people come into the ecosystem to own vehicles, to own assets, and so on. And so our model is to partner with people who already own assets that generate power that they don't use. And if you
mm.
go from hotels, for example, during the day when the commercial riders are on the road, hotels generate power and the occupants are not in there. And so there's already some waste happening in that area. And so we plug in to reduce the waste in power generation and use that to scale very quickly. And we have more of those partners trusting us now. And that's where we are. Okay. In the near future, we hope to first off deepen the technology that's helped us to build trust in the industry. I mean, I couldn't overemphasize that. We need to continue to test this technology, improve it, make it more usable when it comes to greater scale. Today we have just under 2,500 electric vehicles on the road deployed
Mm.
by Qoray. We anticipate that in the next year or two, that number could actually triple or quadruple.
Wow.
What that then means is we must ensure that the technology does not break. That trust layer must stay consistent because this is the reason why our partners feel comfortable to work with us, right? So right now, I think that we've built a bit of trust. We've deployed the assets, which is the proof, right? We've got to continue to deepen that technology layer that helped us to build the trust in the first place, and then hopefully, we can have more proof in place, which is more assets on the road, more charging stations for people to access, more swap stations to swap batteries from, and so on and so on.
Wow. Still though, I mean, 2,500 vehicles deployed is an impressive number. I guess we'll go to 10,000 in the next 6 months, eh? Yeah. Lord, yeah, willing, yeah. Um, that's so awesome. Can you just also comment, because I also know that Cap Zero is a big part of, kind of your playbook as well with Corey, right? How does then Cap Zero and your mobility kind of, transporting different individuals around play as part of that as well?
Well, man, Cap Zero is we put that in place to
Mm,
provide I mean, it started as a corporate only solution and
mm,
is still a corporate led business. And what this means is in a place like Nigeria, where you have very big ride hailing businesses like Uber and Bolt and the rest of them,
right.
um, there's been a bit of, I think the standards have dropped a little.
Mm,
So you couldn't find vehicles that are decent enough, especially when an executive says he wants to go from point A to point B for a business meeting. Okay. And so our thought at the time was to bridge that gap or start with a corporate segment, people that care about safe rides for their employees, that care about their brand, meaning that they want to be seen in clean, respectable vehicles. Okay. Also, companies that we felt cared about managing their transportation operations without having to be transport companies themselves. managing drivers, managing fuel consumption, managing the expenses and so on. We take all of that headache off of them. We provide a solution that allows them to onboard themselves, right? Have access to the vehicles either on a lease basis, meaning that it's available to you 24/7, or on a ride hailing basis, meaning that you can log on to the CapZero app and hail a ride, even as a corporate. That was how that came into being. And again, I had said earlier, our job initially was to build a mini ecosystem that allowed everything to function. So if you're building a charging network, for example, where are the vehicles that would charge there? So at that point in time, we invested in the vehicles that fed the charging stations and kept them, at a respectable financial level. Okay, but CapZero, like I said, corporate led, but now we're beginning to see a lot more demand and opportunity in the consumer market, and we're making a play for that as well. And in terms of ownership, we also started with purely company-owned vehicles, and as we go along, like I said, one of our philosophies is we must leave our people with assets. The energy transition cannot leave them or cannot make them just bystanders in the conversation. You've got to be able to leave them with assets that change their lives, for the long term. And so we started a model now, which is now lease to own, where someone can own a CapZero, and after a few years, the assets become theirs after proving performance over a period of time.
Wow. Wow, that's just amazing. That's just amazing. So I hear you're going consumer, so you're gonna take on Uber, I guess.
Oh,
Taking them
well,
head
no,
on.
I really wouldn't say taking on Uber. I think it's really more collaborating with them, because we still
Okay.
find ways to collaborate with them even
Okay.
now, whether it's Uber or Bolt or InDrive. We're constantly in active talks to see how we can benefit. Both of us can benefit from the activities of CapZero and some of the other things that we do.
I see. I see. How I guess is Qoray, as you continue to expand, planning on funding, I guess, your expansion.
So we're very lucky to have
Mm,
a few local institutions who understand how e-mobility works. Sterling Bank, for example, has supported us from day one.
mm,
Alternative Bank, I mentioned about the 120 tricycles deployed in Kano State in Nigeria.
right.
So we have a few financial institutions who do understand, for example, that there's a bit of patience required, and there's a bit of trial and error required, because this is a very new thing for us around here, right? But also we are now seeing more patient capital filter in gradually. We have DFIs who come into the market who are willing to, provide debt financing, sometimes 5, sometimes 6, 7 years, which is not something you find with the local institutions. We also have local development banks also chiming in and providing capital, which is a bit less expensive than what you find with the commercial banks that are also, participating in this space. So everybody is chiming in at this time. But what we hope for in the next year or two is a lot more of these DFIs coming in. That a lot more confidence is built for bigger ticket debt and equity financing to come into the market, and so on. But we're very, very optimistic about the potential of this space as we continue to prove that the unit economics work, that the business models work. What we only hope is that more and more financiers, see this and throw their hats in the ring.
I see. So if you were to point out just one of the biggest obstacles you're trying to solve right now, what would it be and why?
Hmm. Uh, I'm going to take you back to that technology conversation, because I think that um, it is a huge deal, right? So we've done what we've done, and we don't think we have done. We haven't quite achieved scale yet. Okay, I think we're just pre-scale. Now, for us to achieve scale, I think that the technology has got to hold. It cannot break. And so, whether I'm talking to a financier, I'm talking to a fellow participant in the ecosystem, what I tell them is the same. Our job is to make sure we hold the line as far as this IoT and telemetry and collection technology is concerned, because that is the bedrock of the trust that exists in the sector. As long as it continues to hold, right, it means that the confidence will continue, and as more financiers come in, it provides the impetus for others to follow. Because the evidence of scale in any one segment is that there are people going in there to participate and put their cash in. If you have just one financier and just one player, it doesn't provide enough confidence.
Mm.
Okay. And then the second thing is, I also hope that as some of the more private businesses have gone ahead, that public sector participation by virtue of policies are deepened. A few of them already exist, but it's not enough. All right. So I hope that as people interact more with Qoray, they see that this indeed requires a bit of encouragement, both from the national and subnational governments, to deploy policies, deploy the level of support we see in areas like Southeast Asia, in Eastern Africa, in places like Ethiopia, and so on, that the government participates as much as the private sector is doing. And if that happens, we're very confident that we'll probably witness 2, 3, 4x growth in this sector.
Wow, wow. Last question. What advice would you give to another founder trying to build a revolutionary mobility and infrastructure-based business out of Africa? If you were to give them one piece of advice.
Yeah, I think the one I'll go for is anyone can deploy vehicles. It's not hard, right? Anyone can find someone with a deep pocket and deploy vehicles. But the moat, what separates successful mobility businesses will be something a lot deeper. We have found ours. We think that building trust at the level of deploying technology is what gets us to that win. Everybody must find something deeper than deploying vehicles. And I say this because it's almost a contest now when you talk about how many vehicles people have. And that's why I never lead with that. Because, if you have the right financing, you can buy vehicles. If you have
Right.
the right, bank balance, you can buy vehicles. But what keeps the business going is a lot more than that. You've got to build expertise. You've got to build technology that allows scale to happen. And then lastly, the informal sector is where the action is at. You must respect how the informal sector has structured itself and build for consistency in that area.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much, Olabanjo, for your time today. We're at time today. And everyone look out for Core um, Mobility and Energies. They're up and coming and really gonna come scaling just really fast and really amazingly. Thank you so much, Olabanjo, for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, John. It's been a pleasure.